Gen Z thinks Stranger Things invented dark fantasy. These 16 movies from the 80s had cannibalism, shock therapy, and literal life-sucking scenes, and we all watched them back when we were kids. In 1981, Disney decided to make a dark fantasy film, which is weird because this was Disney. They weren't exactly known for morally gray characters and people getting burned alive by dragons. The story follows a wizard's apprentice named Galen who ends up having to kill a dragon. The kingdom's been sacrificing 2 young women to it every year, and Galen's master gets killed while trying to stop it. So now this inexperienced kid has to deal with an ancient dragon that's not going down easy. It's honestly surprising just how dark it was. This wasn't some idealistic fantasy world where good wins and everyone lives happily ever after. People actually died. Magic existed, but it didn't save everyone. Characters made decisions for selfish reasons that you could actually understand. But the real star of the movie was the dragon itself. They created it at Industrial Light and Magic. It was actually the first time they worked on something outside of a Lucasfilm production. Phil Tippett had developed this animation technique for Empire Strikes Back called Go Motion, which was basically an advanced version of stop motion. The dragon they created still looks incredible today. Simple design but striking, and the effects were so groundbreaking that the film got nominated for Best Visual Effects at the Oscars. It's still one of the best dragons ever put on film, and most people under 30 have never even heard of this movie. 3 years later, there was an Argentine-American film that probably nobody saw. David Carradine starred in it, and the director John Broderick was apparently a huge Akira Kurosawa fan. So he decided to remake Yojimbo, but as a sword and sorcery movie set on a desert planet with 2 suns. There's a village with 1 well, and 2 warlords are constantly fighting over it. David Carradine plays a mercenary warrior named Kane who shows up and announces his skills are for hire to the highest bidder. Then he starts playing both sides against each other while actually working toward his own goal. There's a sorceress who's been taken captive, and Kane ends up trying to save her and the villagers while still manipulating the warlords into destroying each other. It's a fun little movie with gritty feel and decent action. The whole thing has this old-school sword and planet vibe that doesn't really exist anymore. But it was an Argentine-American co-production that came and went without much attention, and now it's basically forgotten. This was another movie trying to capitalize on Conan's success. The plot follows Dar, who's the son of a king but gets literally ripped from his mother's womb by a cult on the orders of a priest. A family rescues the baby and raises him, and Dar discovers he can communicate with animals. Then the priest tracks him down, destroys his adopted home, his father gets killed, and Dar swears revenge. The movie was based on a 1949 novel called The Beastmaster, which was about a Navajo hero in a sci-fi setting. The film took that concept and did what Hollywood loved to do in the 80s, put a white guy in the lead role and changed it to fantasy instead of sci-fi. They kept the basic revenge plot and the animal communication ability, but that was about it. The movie's mostly forgotten now. Gen Z hasn't discovered it, which is probably for the best. The whole premise of making a Navajo character white wouldn't exactly play well today. It's 1983 and Return of the Jedi is dominating theaters everywhere. And then this other movie comes out and absolutely nobody shows up. It becomes the biggest fantasy box office bomb of the entire decade. Which is wild because Krull is actually darker and scarier than Return of the Jedi. It's this weird fantasy sci-fi hybrid that feels like someone mashed up Star Wars and Lord of the Rings into one movie. People weren't ready for it in 1983, and honestly might still not be ready for it. The plot is pretty straightforward. Prince Colwyn needs to save a princess from this villain called the Beast, who's invaded the planet Krull with his army. Simple good versus evil stuff. Except the movie looks like it was made for TV and the stakes never really feel that high. But here's what makes it interesting. It was Liam Neeson and Robbie Coltrane's first major screen appearances. Neither of them are the stars. They're just part of this group of bandits that Colwyn recruits, but you can see them early in their careers before anyone knew who they were. The movie bombed hard at the box office, but a lot of people who saw it as kids still love it. There's a Masters of the Universe remake coming out this year with Jared Leto playing Skeletor, which already looks terrible and will probably bomb. But the 1987 original is actually worth watching, even though almost nobody talks about it anymore. This was Dolph Lundgren's first leading role after Rocky IV. Frank Langella played Skeletor, and the cast also had Courtney Cox before Friends, plus a bunch of other people you'd recognize. It was based on the Mattel toy line and the He-Man cartoon from the 80s. The first part of the movie takes place on another planet called Eternia. Skeletor and his army take over Castle Grayskull, scatter all the defenders, and capture the Sorceress because he wants to absorb her power. It's all very He-Man, very fantasy and very epic. And then halfway through the movie shifts to Earth, just regular Earth. That's where it loses a lot of people, because the whole Eternia setting was working, and suddenly you're watching these characters run around modern-day California. The movie probably would have been better if it just stayed on that other planet, but Frank Langella's performance as Skeletor is legitimately iconic. And now they cast Jared Leto for the remake. Good luck with that. Ron Howard directed this one, with George Lucas producing and coming up with the story. Warwick Davis plays a reluctant farmer who ends up protecting a special baby from a tyrannical queen who wants to destroy her and take over the world. The movie had a lot going for it. Val Kilmer was well cast, the main performances were solid, Warwick Davis did a good job in the lead, but there were these comic relief characters thrown in that kind of killed the vibe, and you can tell Ron Howard maybe wasn't totally confident in what he was doing yet. He was still figuring out how to handle a big fantasy epic. The script got nominated for Worst Screenplay at the Razzies. Critics hated Willow when it came out, but the movie actually turned a profit despite the bad reviews. It's one of those movies where you can see what they were trying to do, and there are moments where it almost gets there. It's not great, but it's also not as bad as people said it was. Richard Donner made this in 1985, with Matthew Broderick, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Rutger Hauer. It's a medieval fantasy romance thing, but the hook is really good. There's a bishop who's obsessed with Pfeiffer's character. When he finds out she's in love with Rutger Hauer's character, he makes a demonic pact to curse them. During the day, she becomes a hawk. At night, he becomes a wolf. Neither one remembers being an animal. They can only see each other in human form for one moment at dusk and dawn, but they can never touch. The whole movie is about trying to break that curse, and Broderick is helping them figure it out. He has to get both of them in front of the bishop in human form at the same time, which is the whole centerpiece of the film. Now, Broderick gets criticized a lot for this role. People say he's too modern, too out of place in a medieval setting, but honestly, he works fine. He's the comic relief and the audience surrogate, and he does what he needs to do. Hauer is the real standout. He's at his best here. The action sequences are solid, and the ending actually delivers. It was popular when it came out, but it's one of those movies that just sort of faded over time. Same year, Ridley Scott makes Legend. Tom Cruise, Tim Curry, and the plot is pretty simple. Darkness wants eternal night, so he sends a goblin to kill the unicorns that protect the light and bring back their horns. The best thing about this movie, and I mean the only reason to watch it, is Tim Curry as Darkness. He's incredible. Full prosthetics, horns, red skin, and he completely commits to it. It's a legendary performance in every sense. Tom Cruise, on the other hand, feels completely wrong for this. He plays this character named Jack, and his whole approach is too weak and maybe too modern for what the movie's trying to be. He just doesn't fit the vibe of a dark fantasy fairy tale. If you're going to watch it, you need to get the director's cut. The theatrical version had a bunch of problems that Scott fixed later. The director's cut is 114 minutes, fixes the story issues, and uses Jerry Goldsmith's original score. It's a completely different experience. Jim Henson and Frank Oz made The Dark Crystal in 1982, and it's one of the weirdest fantasy films of the 80s. The concept artist was Brian Froud, who Henson worked with again later on Labyrinth. The plot's straightforward enough. 1,000 years ago on a distant planet, a magical crystal cracked. That split created two races. the evil Skeksis who use the dark crystal's power to stay alive, and the kind wizards called mystics. The story follows Jin, an elf-like creature. He's on a quest to restore balance by finding the lost shard and fixing the crystal. This was marketed as a family film, but it's way darker than anything Henson had done before. There's this one scene where the Skeksis literally suck the life out of a small creature using some pseudo-scientific torture device. Not what you expect from the guy who made the Muppets. The animatronics were groundbreaking for 1982, and they still hold up surprisingly well. The whole thing has this old-school science fantasy feel to it, and the production design is incredible. It's a truly original film. Nothing else looks or feels like it. Ray Harryhausen was a special effects legend who'd been doing stop-motion animation for decades, and this was his final project. MGM threw a lot of money at it. They got Harry Hamlin as the lead and then filled out the cast with massive names like Laurence Olivier and Maggie Smith. And that might have been the problem. The movie's enjoyable, don't get me wrong, but you can kind of feel where the money went. The effects sequences are often too short. You'll get these glimpses of Harryhausen's incredible creatures and then they're gone. It makes you wonder what the film could have been if they'd spent less on that all-star cast and more on making the fantasy sequences longer and more elaborate. The movie as a whole is a worthy effort, definitely a classic in its own right, and it was actually successful. It was the 11th highest-grossing film of 1982, but there's this sense watching it that it could have been more epic, if they'd made different choices about where the budget went. In 1985, Disney decided to make a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, one of the happiest, most colorful films in cinema history, and they made it absolutely terrifying. The movie opens with Dorothy being completely depressed. She's just been on this incredible adventure to a magical land, and then she came back to Kansas at the turn of the century, which was cold and miserable. Nobody believes her stories about the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion. They think she's delusional. So they put her in an institution. They're going to give her shock treatment. This is how the movie starts. They're about to electrocute Dorothy's brain because she won't shut up about Oz. Eventually, she gets back to Oz, but it's not the Oz from the first movie. It's a nightmare. The yellow brick road is destroyed, the Emerald City is in ruins, everything's dead and terrifying. If you grew up watching this movie, you had nightmares. There's no question about it. It traumatized an entire generation of kids who thought they were sitting down to watch something like the original Wizard of Oz. Of course, Dorothy saves Oz and things get better, and you actually feel that relief. But back in the day, this movie scared the hell out of everyone. The Last Unicorn came from Rankin Bass, the studio that made all those holiday specials and the animated Hobbit and Return of the King. So there's a decent chance you've actually seen this one before, or at least heard of it. This movie should be mentioned alongside the Disney Renaissance classics. It should be up there with Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, but it's not. It's this outsider that never got that recognition for some reason. The story's based on a book by Peter S. Beagle. A unicorn discovers she might be the last one left in the world, so she sets out to find out if that's true. The animation is gorgeous. It's a bit like classic European art, and there's this mix of funny and romantic and melancholic and scary that just works. Some of the satirical stuff from the book got toned down for kids, but it's still beautiful. Hansel and Gretel is already one of the darkest fairy tales out there. Kids get abandoned in the woods by their parents who can't afford to feed them anymore. They find a gingerbread house owned by a nice old lady who wants to feed them, except she's actually planning to fatten them up and eat them. This 1987 version from Canon Films really leaned into that. At first, it's trying way too hard to be Disney. There are some songs that just don't work, and the whole beginning feels kind of cheap and forgettable. But then the kids meet the witch, and the entire movie changes. The witch is played by Cloris Leachman, and her performance is incredible. When she first appears, she's so welcoming and sweet that you completely understand why kids would walk into her house. She seems genuinely kind. And then she makes her turn and becomes one of the most frightening characters in any children's film. She's campy and terrifying at the same time, which is really hard to pull off. It should be taught in acting classes. If you can make it through the weak first half, the payoff with the witch makes it worth it. Terry Gilliam had already done Time Bandits in Brazil by 1988, and then he decided to make a third film to cap off his trilogy of imagination, except he was going to make it even weirder than the first two. So the movie starts with a European town about to get destroyed by Ottoman invaders. An old man shows up claiming he's Baron Munchausen, a legendary figure who supposedly did all these impossible things. Nobody believes him. Well, Sally Salt believes him. She's a kid in the acting troupe that's performing there. When he decides to fly off and find his old companions, she sneaks along. His companions all have ridiculous abilities. One guy can run faster than bullets. Another can see for miles. The movie just bounces from one weird scene to another, and Gilliam clearly didn't care if any of it made logical sense. He wanted you to watch it happen and not ask questions. It's a shame the film bombed at the box office. Hardly anyone saw it when it came out. Ralph Bakshi had done Fritz the Cat and the animated Lord of the Rings before this. In 1983, he wanted to make a sword and sorcery film, so he made Fire and Ice. The plot's straightforward. There's a sorceress queen and her son using ice magic to destroy everything. Only one volcanic city is still standing. They kidnap the princess to force her to marry the son. She escapes, runs into a warrior whose village got wiped out, and they team up with another fighter to stop the ice tyrants. You've seen that story before. What made Fire and Ice different was how Bakshi animated it. He used rotoscoping. You film real actors doing the movements, then animate over the footage, so the characters actually move like people instead of typical cartoon characters. When they fight, you see the weight in their bodies. The film doesn't explain much about the world. The volcanic city defends itself with lava and some flying things called Dragonhawks. The ice sorcerer has powers that look scary, but nobody tells you how they work. There are hints about the mysterious warrior's past that never get resolved. Bakshi cared more about visuals than making sure you understood everything. And for an animated fantasy from 1983, it looks pretty good. Quest for Fire is set 80,000 years ago. A tribe of early humans needs fire to survive. Another tribe raids them and puts out their flame. 3 guys get sent to find a new source, and eventually they meet a woman from a more advanced tribe. She knows things they don't, like how to actually make fire instead of just finding it somewhere. The film does something very interesting. There's no dialogue you can understand. The characters speak, but it's not any real language, and there are no subtitles. You figure out what's happening by watching. It feels less like a movie and more like watching a documentary about prehistoric people. When they fight, they're smashing each other with rocks. Nothing's cleaned up or made prettier. You're just watching people try not to die.